Are you trying to get someplace with your RV, but you really don't want to spend $50, $60, $70 just to pull in and get a few hours sleep? Well, maybe overnight RV parking is a way to go. And today we are going to discuss that in Travels with Delaney,
the podcast.
Hey everyone, my name is Patrick.
And I'm Patty.
And we're so glad you stopped by this episode of Travels with Delaney, the podcast. Patty, you know, I remember years ago, we talked about overnight parking, but we were kind of scared to do it.
A little leery, unsure.
Yeah, and I think back of how many years did we not, and we would just spend literally 50, 60 bucks a night, pull in, get a few hours sleep, and then we were back on the road the next day.
Probably many.
Think of all the money we could have saved.
Think of all the shoes.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, when you think of that away, that could be like maybe a pair of shoes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so today, what I thought we would do is kind of talk about what is overnight parking. And I'm very cautious to use that word parking versus camping. And where can you do it? And just kind of throw out some etiquette in case anyone's listening to this podcast and you've always wondered, like, I don't know, maybe we could stay at a Walmart.
Right.
But they're just like us for so many years where we didn't know. Right. And so thought maybe we could talk about that and answer some questions.
Okay.
So I think we're just going to dive right in. And so the reason I said RV parking, and I didn't say RV camping, is because we're seeing more and more locations drying up because people have abused the privilege of overnight parking.
Right.
I mean, we've seen some crazy stuff before. Like, do you remember the time at our local Walmart when there was, and this is a true story, you can't make this stuff up, but we ran out to Walmart to get something, and we pull in, and there's this RV in the parking lot, which is no big deal. Most Walmarts, I shouldn't say most anymore, a lot of Walmarts will allow overnight RV parking.
Right.
But in this particular case, they were parked, but they had not only their slide outs out, but they had their awning out. They had lawn chairs out, and they were barbecuing in the Walmart parking lot.
Had their little grill all going.
Yep. Like they were truly camping at Walmart.
Yeah.
And it's that type of thing that has kind of ruined it for so many RVers across the country.
Right.
And so I always say, in fact, when Patty calls Cracker Barrel, she'll always say, do you allow one night of overnight RV parking? She never says, can we camp tonight in your parking lot? So
yeah,
and that's really what it's designed for, is just pull in,
place to park,
get a good night's sleep, and get back on the road.
And you hope these places are safe. That's why we use Allstays app, because we can look up like a Walmart as we're driving, and I can look to see like what other folks have said when they have parked there. If there was noise from like dumpsters, behind like a Cracker Barrel, and because they get their trash picked up, or if there's noise from a railroad track nearby or the highway, or if there's just anything that's different that maybe they've come across, to try to help understand and what we need to do if that's where we want to be.
Yeah, there's lots of different apps you can use. We do primarily rely on Allstays, but I have recently started using our Togo app. And I think you have to have the upgraded version, the Road Pass, which we have because I like the RV navigation. But one of the links in that app is free overnight parking locations. And so they will list all these potential places in an area that you could overnight park, and it will let you know if they have verified whether it's allowed or not. And so that's really nice and I see places where it'll say RV overnight parking is not allowed.
Right.
And again, I mentioned Walmarts earlier because they were kind of the one that I think a lot of people for years have thought as that go-to location. But so many of them now are not allowing it.
They don't want them.
And I believe the official statement on the Walmart website basically says that we welcome RVers. However, it's up to the individual location store manager. And in some cases, the reason they don't allow it is some cities or counties have enacted ordinances against it.
Right.
Now, my understanding is a lot of times these ordinances were drawn up with the urging of the local campgrounds, because obviously campground owners,
they probably like they're losing money, maybe.
Absolutely. And so that could be a reason. But we also know, because I remember calling and talking to a Walmart manager once to see if we could stay. And what he basically said was, you are allowed if you have a small RV, but he says, I'm not allowing like semis anymore, because what he told me was it was tearing up their parking lot.
Right.
And it was so expensive every time they had to repave. And so he was being very selective on who he would allow.
Well, and didn't one time, I think we were in Colorado, we called a Walmart and they said we could camp, but don't be shocked if you don't get a knock on your door in the middle of the night from the local sheriff.
Right.
We're like, why would he do that? Well, they said the ordinances of the city. So we're like, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, so that was a case where there was a city ordinance. The manager on duty said, you're welcome. We have people stay here. We haven't had anybody kicked out recently, but we just have been warning people that by law.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were both like, yeah, we'll just keep driving.
Well, and it was getting really late. And we weren't sure, but I think it worked out in our benefit.
We
if you remember where we ended up.
Right. We ended up driving and ended up at a National Forest Service campground the next morning, woke up to a beautiful view of the Rocky Mountains. But
beautiful.
So yeah, I mean, so there's different apps you can find these locations. And I mean, probably the most common again are going to be Walmart, Cracker Barrel, some Cabela's. I've heard some Camping Worlds, if you're a Good Sam's member. Truck stops a lot of times will allow for RV overnight parking, and I think the list goes on. I mean, I see people posting, different locations they've said, and sometimes it's different retail besides,
right?
But I think the number one thing is, even if you've identified through an app that like, hey, this Cracker Barrel says they allow, we still call most of the time.
We just want to make sure and get a verbal answer from someone in the store or restaurant or whatever, from the manager saying that this is okay. Because, we just don't want to have to worry about that in the middle of the night if someone's like coming to our door.
Patty usually makes the phone call, because we'll be driving. And once we realize like this is how far we want to go, she'll find a Cracker Barrel, she'll make the call. And she always asks 2 questions when they answer. And those 2 questions are,
do you allow overnight RV parking? And then when does the store open in the morning, the restaurant? Because we're staying there and then we feel like we need to give back. And plus you're hungry and it's a good place to eat. And in the morning we can get a nice hot breakfast before we head out.
Yep.
So,
yeah. And I think no matter where you're staying, I think that makes a lot of sense to give back. So when we used to stay at Walmart's, I would always make it a point to go in and buy something. And I wouldn't
supply or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's always something from a Walmart, like food that we could get. I mean, I wasn't just buying something to buy something. And we've kind of transitioned from Walmart's to Cracker Barrel. I prefer Cracker Barrel anymore. And so we usually don't get in time for dinner, because part of the reason for the overnight parking for us is we want to drive and get as many miles in.
Right.
And I don't want to be pulling into a campground at 11 o'clock at night
and waking people up,
trying to figure out where your site is in the dark, trying to get backed in. Because the great thing about like at a Cracker Barrel, they always have really good lighting in the parking lot. You just pull into the RV spaces. It's just so much easier, and you're not going to wake anybody up other than somebody else who's overnighting, and they I think understand.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, but we always have tried to, so we just stay, we'll have breakfast the next morning, and then we hit the road.
And we've been pretty lucky. And we kind of veered away from Walmart just because it seemed to be a lot noisier than a Cracker Barrel, I think.
Although we have had some noisy Cracker Barrels. So I don't want people to think like, oh, it's going to be quiet at a Cracker.
It just depends, I guess, on when they get their trash pickup or their delivery.
Yes, that's it. I was going to say the 2 major noises we always hear if we're going to hear something.
Dumpsters being empty.
Oh my gosh. And a lot of times these Cracker Barrels are located with lots of other businesses.
Right.
And I remember, I think
it seemed like it with the trash guy went from business to business, like the hotels around us or whatever.
You remember that? I think it was in Tennessee, and it was like, it seemed like it went on forever. And I'm like, this Cracker Barrel cannot have that many dumpsters. And then once we were kind of out, up. I was like, there's like 4 hotels around us, and they all have dumpsters that are getting emptied. So,
oh my gosh, that was so noisy.
And then deliveries, you're right, because a lot of times they'll get their food deliveries early in the morning. But we've also had some Cracker Barrels where it's been super quiet.
Right. Or, the highway, they say, well, the highway noise, well, we don't even notice it sometimes.
No.
Especially like if you have a fan running or, that type of year, depends on the type of year or when. But yeah, that's usually our go-to place
Yeah,
anymore.
and I tell you, I love Cracker Barrels because we have never been turned down for a Cracker Barrel.
No.
I'm not saying there's not a Cracker Barrel out there that doesn't, because I know there's some Cracker Barrels that don't even have RV parking,
Right.
like the one down in Anderson, Indiana. When I look it up, it says no RV or semi parking, so most likely they're not going to allow it.
Right.
But the ones we've ever called have never said no, and they've always been so welcoming. Like, and when I go in the morning to get breakfast, I always say thank you to the sir, like the person that's getting my food. I always say like, hey, we're out back and we stayed overnight, and I just wanted to thank you guys so much because, and they're always like, oh, we're so glad you stayed with us. And, I mean, they make you feel like you're at home.
Yes.
And I'm just praying people don't end up abusing this and ruining it, because it's a really good thing that's going on.
And one of the Cracker Barrels that sticks out in my mind, I think it was in Montana, and it was a big parking lot out back, and there was like a wooded area or a park or something behind us. So it was like a really pretty setting, and it was really quiet.
Right.
That was beautiful.
And that was one of the few times that we have ever gotten into a Cracker Barrel fairly early.
Yeah.
So the story behind that was we were driving. Patty, we were looking for a place to stay. That was the COVID summer, if I remember right, 2020.
I think
and
so.
So most of we kept stopping at campgrounds early on in the afternoon, and places were just full. And so we were coming into Billings, and we had stayed at the Billings KOA once before, and they said, yes, we have a site available. Wasn't it like 100 or
it was a crazy
some ridiculous price? And I was like, absolutely not. And she said, well, there's a Cracker Barrel. You want me to call them? And you did.
Yeah.
And I think you even said like, is it okay if we come now because we haven't had dinner? And they were like, yeah, sure, come on now. We don't care. And so we ended up getting in there like at, I don't know, 5 or 6 o'clock. It was early. And I remember after we kind of, got set up per se, as much as you set up at a Cracker Barrel, but we placed an order.
Yep.
I went in and got it. And I even asked again, I said, do we need to pull out and go somewhere when we're done eating before we come back for the evening? And they were like, absolutely not. You were fine. Because they actually had a lot
of parking. And we've even gotten kind of, I guess, strategic. Because if you have a camper with a slide out that you need to put out, because we used to not put it out for fear we didn't want to like crowd someone else's RV spot.
And we still don't.
Right. But if we get there and we could see like a spot that's near, like they have like a cutout of grass.
Like an island.
Yeah. Yep. We do that area so that we can put the slide out over the grass area, or we can get really close and we have room to put the slide out and potty the puppies too. It helps for both things.
Right.
But yeah.
We're very strategic in how we park, because can we get by without putting the slide out? If we absolutely have to, yes. It makes it much more difficult though. And so that's why, and again, like Patty said, I would never take a second space to get the slide out. So I always park in a way that it's hanging out over like a grassy area, I guess is.
Well, they've even told us sometimes when I call, they're like, you can park along the edge.
Right.
If you would rather, with your slide out, and just out back. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Well, in fact, so here's another. When we had called the Cabela's in Bowling Green, Kentucky, I think that was a year ago, 2 years ago. And because we were just like, we want to try Cabela's. And they said, yeah, absolutely no problem. Here's where you need to go to park. So we pull in at like,
it was late.
It was probably 9:30 at night. Maybe
dark.
They were closed.
I know it was dark.
And we pulled in, and the parking lot was completely full.
It was packed. We couldn't figure out why.
Completely full of cars. There was, and where we were supposed to park, there was no room to park. And to this day, we don't know what was going on, because the store was closed.
Yep.
There was no movie theater around there. There was some hotels and restaurants.
What would be drawing all these cars? Yeah.
And so we were like, well, we can't stay here. And so we went across the street to the Cracker Barrel, because Patty, in the meantime, is looking it up, and she says, well, there's a recent report. I say recent, I think within like a couple years, that said they allowed overnight RV parking. So I'm like, well, let's take a shot. And we pulled over there. I knew they were closed, so it must have been around 10.
Yeah.
or 9:30. But there was two. If you remember, there were two managers,
Right.
or
They were outside.
and as I pulled around the Cracker Barrel, I rolled down my window and I just said, "Do you allow overnight RV parking?" And he says, "Absolutely." And I said, "Okay, I'll go find the RV spots." And he actually walked over, if you remember, and he said, "You don't want to park in those RV spots." He said, "They're really short." He said, "Just go to the back. That way you can pull in, put your slide out, and you'll have plenty of space." And he goes, "What time are you planning on leaving in the morning?" I said, "Well, what time do you open?" And he said 7 a.m. And I said, "Well, we just like to have breakfast." He goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah." He says, "We don't even start getting busy till probably 8:30."
Mm-hmm.
So, and he goes, "We hardly ever have anybody park back
Right.
there." So I mean, he went out of his way because I kept saying, "No, I can fit. I know I can fit." And
Yeah.
he's like, don't mess with it. Just, make yourself comfortable."
Right.
So yeah, I just always love, and the thing is, that's why we always, thank them and we
Right.
buy food because we just don't want that to disappear.
Absolutely. It's such a nice, I guess, amenity.
Right.
If you're like us when it's during the school year and you have to go miles, not like when we travel in the summer, but yeah, you got to get there, that it just is very, very convenient.
Absolutely. So, um, and then there's a lot of controversial things. Like we never put our awning out.
No.
Or, I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, our awning.
Yeah, don't do awning.
We don't get out chairs. We don't barbecue outside. We don't do anything because again, most of the time we're
No.
pulling in late.
Right.
But we do put down our stabilizers.
Right. Because we stay hitched up to the truck, of course, and
Yep.
you put down the, because otherwise it just rocks so badly
Right.
and it's uncomfortable.
And I have snap pads and so the snap pads are going to protect their asphalt.
Right.
And so I just quickly put down the 4 stabilizers just to try to help stabilize so
Right.
that all night long you don't feel like you're on a boat.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Yeah,
That's
that's
setup.
it. That's it.
We don't
Yep.
unhitch or anything like that.
No.
And then again, we try to get out of there as quickly as possible before they get busy for their breakfast rush.
I mean, I think, I don't know if we did, but we've heard people use generators because they ask, I know when people said it's okay to use your
Yeah.
generator. But
We never had. No, I take that back. We did one
maybe
time.
out in Montana, maybe
Yeah,
when it was beastly
and
hot.
they told us to.
Yeah,
They said they
it's
didn't
okay.
care because they said there's so much noise.
Yeah, from the road or whatever.
But yeah, in general, though, you really want to try to just blend in.
Yep.
And not act,
Kind of like when you hike on the AT, the Appalachian Trail, you want to leave no trace. So
Yep,
you want to just
exactly.
slide in, like stealth-like, and you're out.
Yep. No dumping your tanks in their sewer system.
No.
No using their dumpsters for all of your trash.
No.
Just be respectful.
Right.
And again, that's it. And then I guess the big question is it safe?
Right.
Now, here's my basic rule of thumb is if it doesn't feel right, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anywhere we are.
And so one of the reasons I wanted to record this podcast now, even though it was on what I call the big board, which is actually a really small board of ideas,
Yeah.
Was because we had a situation coming home
just recently,
where we had called ahead to a Cracker Barrel.
Yep.
That we have stayed at before.
Right.
And again, they were like, absolutely. We pull in and I see a person sitting in a lawn chair in the grass at the back of the Cracker Barrel. This is like the grass between the Cracker Barrel and
like
a hotel.
Yep.
And there's a car parked back there somewhat near him.
Right.
But I still think that was probably for an employee at the Cracker Barrel.
I think this guy did not have the car. Yeah.
And he had what appeared to be like a tarp over his legs as he's sitting there. And I notice he's watching me as we pull in and I'm getting, into the spot I want so that the slide out will be over the grass.
Well, and it was like, why is he sitting there? It's so cold.
And it was, yeah.
Yeah, because
this is Kentucky. This is like 30
or less.
And
it was going to get uber cold, like in the 20s and upper teens at night. I'm thinking, what in the world? Why? I thought, well, maybe he's from the hotel. Is he outside reading a book? But then it's like, why wouldn't he be closer to the hotel? Because they have benches and stuff. It was just odd.
It was. And so we sat there for, I don't know, felt like a while, but
not very long.
Maybe a minute. And I remember you said to me, what's wrong? And I said, there's and then I think that's when you noticed him. And I said, Patty, something just doesn't feel right. Like, why is this guy sitting back there Now he may have, you even said, could he be from the
That's what
hotel
I said. I go,
smoking? Because I think he was smoking.
right.
And I said, at first I was like, well, maybe. And then I got thinking about like, who travels with a lawn chair?
Well, why would you have the tarp?
Yeah.
So
And
it was
we
different.
don't know. I don't know if he was homeless. I don't know what, but here's what I knew I didn't want was to get in my RV and go to bed and then have somebody knocking on the
Yep.
RV asking me for
Money
or
or
whatever.
food or whatever.
And so we ended up, I said, you know what? Um, Kentucky Horse Park
Yep, wasn't
was
too
nearby,
far. We just,
which is a campground state park that we've stayed at
yep,
before. I said, let's go over and see if they have walk up type deal.
and they did.
And luckily they did. Put your money in the envelope, pick a site.
Yep.
And so there was a case where we just did not feel comfortable. And we've stayed at that Cracker Barrel before and never felt uncomfortable.
Right.
One other time I remember we stopped at a Walmart. This has been a few years
We were
ago.
on our way to Glacier.
Is that where it was?
Yeah, we had our nephew with
And
us. Yeah.
we pull into this Walmart and we had called ahead of time and they just said
Right.
anywhere along the outside.
Well, we ended up, I think we were in where they get their deliveries. So the semis were,
Yeah. And there was a lot of cars and young people
like having
hanging
a
out.
party or
And
something.
we kind of sat there again, didn't even really get out. We were just kind of observing, looking.
Right.
And I said, you know what? So again, something doesn't feel
Right.
right.
There was loud music. They were doing something at the cars, and it was just,
Yeah.
it just didn't feel right.
And so I think while we're sitting there, I looked and there was like a Walmart, like, I don't know, was it even 30 miles away?
Not too far.
Not too far.
Yeah.
And so I said, let's go to the next one.
Yep.
In the meantime, Patty's calling them and they're like, yeah, sure, we allow overnight.
Yeah.
And we pull in there, completely the opposite.
Yep.
Super quiet, no like weird things going on, no
Yep.
shenanigans in the parking lot. And
It was actually a better setup because I think we were closer to grass for the
yeah.
puppies.
Oh, it was. It was
and it was just better all around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be my advice is if you're gonna overnight in your RV, which I
Yep.
think is fine. We've been doing it
We
for
do it a
several years
bunch,
now.
yeah.
And again, it, here's the thing. I say it saves us money.
But I don't know for sure.
But here's the thing. Do you want to spend, let's say, even $30 at an RV park, or would you rather spend $30 in the sense that you get like breakfast at Cracker Barrel,
right?
And then that saves $10 if you need to hit the dump station at Flying J or Love's, and there's your $30.
There you go.
So but we got to eat, right?
Well, and
maybe we shouldn't eat. There's times I wonder. Maybe we should.
I don't know about you, but when I wake up, I'm hungry.
Yeah, so she gets hangry.
I get hangry. I'm ready to eat.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I enjoy Cracker Barrel if it all feels good. It's just easy.
Yeah.
Well, you're truly quiet, pretty quiet.
Yep.
Yeah, you got a little highway noise, but
And again, this is not camping.
No.
This is just a place to park it, get some sleep, and get back on the road. Right. So we're only using this for travel days.
Well, and it's also, they're really convenient to the highway. So if you are traveling like we do in the summer, long distance, you don't want to go miles off the highway. It's just easy on, easy off. You're gone. You're done.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
Hey, Patty, I would like to take a moment to thank this episode's sponsor, Happy Acres Campground in Angola, Indiana. So if anyone is planning a trip to Northeast Indiana this summer, check them out at camphappyacres.com.
Right.
They have nice big pull-through sites, 50, 30, 20, full hookups right off I-69 at US 20, just a few minutes south of the Indiana Toll Road, and less than an hour from all the major RV manufacturers and the RV Hall of Fame Museum.
Yep.
So we can't thank Angie and Kevin enough for their support of Travels with Delaney, the podcast. And so again, check them out at camphappyacres.com. So Patty, each episode, we always try to throw out what we call Delaney pro tip.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're really pros, but we have been doing this for 17 years. So I guess
stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
Holiday Inn Express, does that count? I think that makes you a pro in RVing. I think we've probably already talked about this already, but I would say again, use common sense if you're going to do overnight RV parking.
And that's even anything, even when you travel. We've had to use common sense when you just stop at those rest areas.
Right.
There's been weird things that happen, but yeah, you just got to use your common sense, your smarts.
Yeah.
And do
your research.
Yeah. you got to be alert. Like you got to be like when we stop anywhere and I'm pottying puppies, I'm looking around me, I'm watching what's going on. I'm not just, I'm trying to just be aware so I don't get like surprised by anything. So,
Right.
yeah.
And again, do your research.
Yep.
And I would say even not just for overnight parking, but also campgrounds as well.
Right.
I do so much research ahead of time, and I try to find out about the area
Well,
to
and
know.
talking to friends to know about areas that they know more about,
Yeah,
where's a good place, where's a good Cracker Barrel, which one's better than this one. We've done that a bunch.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So just use common
Mhm.
sense with this. And if you've never done it before, like I said, a Cracker Barrel to me is a good, safe
Place
starting
to start.
place.
Yeah.
Well, Patty, this has been an interesting episode. All right. Well, until next time, everybody, we'll see ya.
On down the road.
Good
Bye.
night.
Travels with Delaney. We'll see you on down the road.